I'm Lauren Sterling, and this is Ordinary Grit, the podcast where I talk to ordinary people who have overcome and are doing amazing things, because your story has power.
Hey, Ordinary Grit fans. Welcome back. It has been a minute, and I am so excited to share with you this conversation with a couple of my friends. I've been wanting to have this conversation for months, and now is finally the time. So in a climate where the world says that we cannot, not only really, we can't be friends, but we have a hard time even coexisting with people that we disagree with, that we can't love or respect people that we disagree with. And this is two friends, Dan and Brennan, that disprove that just show how we can not only tolerate each other, but we can also get along and serve and love and be friends with people that are different than us. And this is just a really, really meaty conversation about all of that and what God has to say about that. And there's just some really good nuggets and takeaways from this one. So I cannot wait for you to hear this. Please enjoy my conversation with Dan and Brennan. This morning, very early, my friends Dan and Brennan are willing to talk with me about all things. We may not really get into the politics conversation as much as how can we be friends and love people well and respect people. I think those are different things, and disagree with them. And so in light of the election that was coming, now that it has happened, I wanted to have this conversation because I think you guys have some real leadership in that. You're demonstrating what it looks like to be able to not just coexist or tolerate each other, but be friends and care about each other. And so I just want to hash through that. And I don't know how deep or not deep it will get. We may talk about what God says about it. I would guess that has some driving force in your decisions, but it also has something to do with your personalities and your character. And so I suppose let's do this. How long have you guys been friends?
I thought that might come up in this conversation. And so I was thinking about that. And I will say, I think we were friends before what I'm going to say, but I think one thing that really, I want to say crystallized our friendship was, I knew Dan before COVID, but when COVID hit, I have these recollections of Dan coming over and us, maybe having a beverage on my back deck and just talking about the world and what's going on in it. And we had disagreements about that too, but just having a conversation that was fruitful in the sense that, I assume I made some points, maybe I didn't, but I know Dan made some good points and, helped us both deal with that situation, which was hard on everybody and hard on us.
Well, and that's an example of a time when people were also disagreeing. So did you know ahead of time that, hey, this dude and I don't think the same, but you weren't hanging out all that much until that time?
I think that our friendship was born out of having differing opinions, because during COVID, one of the easiest things to do was sit in isolation and then get in your little echo chambers and just have what you thought and what you believed about, pick any number of topics that surrounded COVID, and it just became this gross echo chamber. And so something that I think really spurred us on to a deeper friendship is actually the differing opinions that Brennan and I had surrounding some of the COVID garbage.
The world says that we can't be friends with people that we disagree with, or that if you disagree with me, that you can't love me, or that I can't love you. Or so that's a little bit of not an oxymoron, but like super not instinctive. We pull away from what makes us uncomfortable, or what we disagree with usually. So some of that may be your guys' personality. I mean, Dan, you're not one to run from an argument, and I mean, Brennan, you argue for a living.
And Brennan more than me.
So maybe that's a big part of it.
He's a lawyer.
Right. He argues for money, but
for a living.
Right. So, I mean, what do you think makes that? I mean, that was a season where, you're right, people isolated, and certainly didn't want to have conversations with people that I almost feel like it began, and I could be wrong. I know some things were happening prior to that. That started some real disagreeing conversations, some racial conversations that were happening prior to COVID. But it almost began the divide, like a really strong divide, in my opinion, of people. And I mean, I don't want you around my kids if we don't agree because you're going to make my kids sick. Or it became so like big that it's a weird time to go, hey, I don't agree with you and I'm going to sit on your back porch anyway. And I'm going to smoke a cigar and talk to you anyway, or whatever you guys did. I don't know. I wasn't there. But so, I mean, what do you think made you?
You're welcome anytime.
Dig in to, hey, we're gonna be friends anyway. Was it because you went to church together and felt like you had to? Is there a sincere appreciation for how the other person thinks?
I mean, I'll let Brennan hit this, but for me, I always left those conversations really filled up. Like I just went home and it was nice. It was good to hear from the differing camp. I don't know, Brennan.
Yeah. A word that Dan said was echo chamber. And it's really easy these days because of social media and all those things to just put yourself with people that feel on a particular topic, like basically segregate the people you're hanging out with based on their beliefs on one particular thing. It's probably the easiest time in the world's history to do that.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is when you're in group settings where you have people with different views on things, where you're not purely selecting a group based on they have this belief and I share that belief, a political belief or whatever that is, it gives an opportunity for you to hear other opinions and other thoughts. And, there was never a point where Dan and I were just yelling at each other. Oh, you're wrong because I believe this and you're wrong. I mean, and that's what you see a lot today.
Mm-hmm.
It was, Dan would say this, I feel this way about whatever, COVID, politics, whatever. And then like, okay, well, why do you feel that way? Like what's behind that?
Yep.
And, I know Dan's heart. I know Dan at the end of the day is a God-fearing Christian guy who is doing his beliefs, what he is ultimately for is the same thing I'm ultimately for. Now, in hearing everything, we may have different opinions of how you get there. But that doesn't necessarily mean I'm completely right. It doesn't mean Dan's completely right. It means there's somewhere in that pressure of those two things hitting together is probably actually what's the right path.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And don't you think that there is something to be said about, like, I think Dan, you were kind of saying, to spend time with, to look across the table, like look in the face of someone that believes these things or disagrees with you. And I think that's true, whether it's to look at someone who's had an abortion, or to look at someone that struggles with same-sex attraction, or rather than talking about this idea that is over here floating around in space, but to sit across the table with someone puts a whole different view or a spin on the way that person thinks, and to be able to go, okay, I'm actually having coffee, or I'm actually figuring out how to love you and how to only say what God wants me to say. And that's a little bit more in a mentoring situation. I had a mentoring situation a few years ago with someone who was really struggling with some things that were very different. And every time I met with her, I met with her Sunday mornings, and Saturday night, I'm like in scripture going, God, do you speak to this? Are you going to come through? Is your word going to be faithful to have this conversation? And because I'd go the next morning and she'd ask me questions about, well, it doesn't say I can't, and getting it back to the core things, like you said, the things we actually care about and agree on are the gospel. But that was the most challenging prior to cancer. That was the most challenging time in my faith, was having to be prepared to meet with her and love her. And she cried every time we met, and she still loved me and wanted to see me every week. And so we don't agree on how we're going to walk this out, but I wanted to hear from a real life person. So I think it changes you for it to be a human that disagrees or that thinks these things.
Yeah, and something I kept hearing while you were talking right there is, Proverbs is full of the idea of being quick to listen and slow to speak. And what you turn on the TV anymore and what you see is people who can't wait for a person to finish a thought before they gotta no, I gotta make my point. I gotta get my
They're
dig in.
articulating their argument the whole time.
Yeah, it's like let the person finish. And there's a podcaster I'm always trying to shove on Brennan, but what impresses me so about this podcaster is like his ability to just ask a question, let the person talk, hear them, give the person the ability to articulate what they feel and why they feel that. We never get to that point in conversations of, okay, I don't agree with that, but I want to hear their why. And that, be it the cigar or beverage or whatever, like the physical act of I'm going to do this while I listen to Brennan, like you're creating time and space to hear people's hearts. And it's just, I can't hardly turn on the TV anymore because all you're going to see is people getting talked over,
Yeah.
because it's so quick to speak and so quick to get their vitriol out. It's like, just shut up.
Do you think that there are any unspoken rules or maybe spoken rules that have helped you? Like, we do not, I don't know, put each other down, or, I mean, you're both funny enough that you probably are mouthy and send some text messages that could cause you some trouble, So
I still laugh. Yeah, I still laugh at our most recent guys trip, through Gateway. Brennan, that's something that's come very fruitfully so out of this, I think, is Brennan and I kind of reviving the father-son trip. And the adults on the trip were sitting out one night, and when the boys were winding down, and we got into a fairly, I don't want to say heated, but it was loud and boisterous, and there was a lot of good-hearted digging. But I think some of the newer guys on the trip were like, oh my gosh. And then for me, the like coolest thing was afterwards, Brennan and I go inside and we hug it out. Love you, man. Love you. Yeah. And I think so, we just kind of got some sideways, like, what?
Yeah.
What was so there was a new, to piggyback on that, there was a new guy on the trip that it was cool that he came because both Dan and I have a connection to him that was not unrelated to each connection. Like I didn't meet him through Dan. Dan didn't meet him through me.
Okay.
We met him. We met him in separate environments, social settings. But we had a spot open, and we're like, hey, Dan was like, we should invite this guy on the trip, and I'm like, yeah, I agree. And he came. And one of the things we were kind of debriefing at the last night on the trip, and I was like, and we were like, hey man, well, what'd you think? And he goes, well, they say you shouldn't talk about religion and politics, but that seems to be all you guys talk about.
That's funny. So do you think there is some level though of like, we just don't get offended? We have a rule, we don't get offended, or do we not dig on personal? I mean, are we not mean, or how do you have a loud disagreement and recover? I think people need to know how. We literally don't know how.
So I would say two things on that. One is, like, I started when we started having this conversation. I know Dan's heart, and I know, whatever he says about whatever, pick your topic, his heart's in the right place. Like, again, I may not agree with it. I may not see how it relates to what's in his heart, but I know that's where he's coming from.
Yeah.
The other thing we do, and I think the term we say is, when we're talking about things, you're in the nest. You're in this environment where if you say it, I'm not going to come in on Sunday and say, you won't believe what Dan said last night. Blah 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 blah. Like it's
what's said in the nest stays in the nest.
Yeah. I mean, and we'll say that to people. Like, no, it's okay. You could say it. We're in the nest.
I think what Brendan's getting to is, at the end of the day, he's my brother. Like, we're brothers in Christ, and I love all the saints. Like, at the end of the day, the main thing is Christ. The main thing's the main thing. And so I think, Lauren, to ultimately answer your question, like, as long as that's the main thing, like, all this other stuff is peripheral. That Satan, I truly believe, is using as a distractor to divide and
Mhm.
And you see it big C church now. It's dividing the church. And at the end of the day, like again, like Brennan says, we know each other's heart because each other's heart is Jesus Christ. And as long as the main thing is the main thing, like we can throw some jabs and punches and you know, we're not going to break. It's not going to fracture us. It's like he said, we all want the same end on that note. And the rest of the stuff is sometimes not even means to get there. It's just peripheral life.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of pieces to that. Giving someone the benefit of the doubt or knowing his heart is really key. And whether or not you really did ahead of COVID, or you just, I don't know, assumed in a good way that, you know, I think I know this guy. I think I know that, you know, at the end of the day, we're working towards the same thing in Jesus. But that still requires effort sometimes when he's a jerk or when you're, you know, fighting back. Or I don't know, maybe it's just guys are, it's easier maybe to in even secular life, the guys can fight and punch each other and they can recover. I don't know, but you just aren't seeing it in the world the same way. So I think it's really encouraging to one, remind people to give people the benefit of the doubt, and to and not like assume that everything they're saying is good, but assuming their heart, assuming that if I know you and I care about you, I think the same can be said about in your church or in your circles of believers. Is we may not know them super personally, but hey, are we all trying to do the same thing? Because odds are we disagree with half the people we sit with on Sundays. I think we forget that when we post on social media or we say things out here, and we're that easily people we sit by could disagree. The other thing is,
And it's the recognition of those people you're sitting by on Sunday that you sit next to, that they're part of the body, and the body is made of different parts with different purposes. And I fully recognize that in Brennan, like to the point where I really, really wanted us in our leadership room, because I know he possesses a skill set and parts that I don't. And those very things that we disagree on, or those elements of Brennan that sometimes drive me nuts, are the exact same reason why he has to be a part of the body. Does that make any sense?
yeah, no, and it stretches you and teaches
Mhm.
and sanctifies in a really uncomfortable way, though. I mean, are not marriages kind of like that too? Like,
Amen.
Oh,
right? We're
absolutely.
different. Yeah, guys and, you know, men and women don't think all the time the same. And I mean, gosh, if we can only love and respect people we agree with, I don't know that anybody would have any friends. If you have to agree on everything across the board, I don't think we'd have any friends or we'd ever get married, because isn't that similar? Like the things that are different about your wives are what it makes you better, helps you think, why does she think like that? Why is she doing that? Why does she feel that way? Like that's really time and obviously a commitment that you made to not blow up your marriage. And we don't have that same level of commitment with every friendship and relationship we have. But there are elements of that we have to take to other relationships, because that you're being sanctified in that leadership room. And you know, I'm not saying that only Dan needs to be sanctified, but you know, I think that's part of,
I need more
like,
than others.
I think that's part of iron sharpening iron. Don't you think that's probably painful? Like
Yeah.
metal on metal hurts and can start a fire, right? I mean, that's hard.
And
It's interesting you use that line, because that same.
yeah, go ahead, Dan.
You want me to tell you? The place that Ty found this year, our buddy Ty found for the father-son thing, the fire pit out back has Proverbs 27:17 inscribed into it, and it's called Iron Bluffs Mountain. And it was just very interesting. I know both of us were sitting in those discussions and in those moments, and you'd look at that and you'd be like, man, that's an excellent point, Lauren. Like, this is not easy. This is at times uncomfortable, and it gets you fired up, and pun intended. But it's a grind, and you know, any relationship, it takes time of seeing one another through those differences. And then, like you said, recognizing that ultimately that's going to make us better as a unit. Those exact differences are going to make us better.
And that's the distinction, right? Because when you were talking, Lauren, you mentioned like, oh, go post this on social media. And yeah, you have whoever your friends are on social media, you probably have at least some acquaintanceship, I guess. I don't know if that's actually a word, but you know what I mean. You've at least met them at some point in your life, or met somebody who knows them, whatever. But you don't really have, for some of them, you don't really have a relationship.
Right.
And so there's this big difference in just going and posting something online that 1,000 people can see, without having any conversation or connection with those people in that moment, versus when you're discussing that issue or whatever it is in the context of either, a friendship, or as you were talking about, in a marriage, or something where you have, where the issue is not centric, the relationship is centric, and the issues need to be discussed, and that's good, but they're not the reason you're together to begin with.
Yeah. So, I mean, I feel like that's like the key. We kind of got to the key sooner than I thought we would. It's really not as difficult as far as how to do it, why to do it. I mean, you just do it because you care about each other, and because you both care about the same thing in Christ. Like, okay, we could be done. Like, podcast over. We're probably oversimplifying it, and you guys make it seem easy because I would say, have had to work towards it. But
you know what the not easy part is? I think that's where the discussion is. The not easy part is making time to intimately get to know one another. For Brennan and I, that has been constant. The constant issue is diligently consistent, and he's awesome at this. Like, no, we are going to create space to do this, because if we don't, we assume the worst about the other, or they're thinking this that's just my own bias filling in the gaps of us not doing life together. The hard part is that in this society, I don't think Brennan and I are unique in that. Like, the hard part is finding space and time for that person, especially two professional people that have families at home with kids that are at that age where they're involved in freaking everything. Like, that's the hard part, right? Right, Brennan?
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that, because it is time. It's finding the time, because, it's not, we don't, it isn't like we show up at my back deck or Dan's porch or whatever with a list of issues and just plow into the issues for 30 minutes, then go home.
There's no agenda.
Yeah. There's no agenda. We're just sitting there and spending time together. And, things come up, issues come up, and we talk about them, but that's not the focus. Like, it's in that time of just being together and just talking about whatever's on our minds, and I will tell you one thing that I was convicted about. Dan preaches occasionally at our church, and he mentioned some stuff going on. I don't want to get into all of it here, but he mentioned some stuff that was going on in his life. And in that moment, I was like, man, I knew about one of the things, but not everything. And I'm like, I need to get together and we need to talk. I've lost a little bit of touch with that. Yeah. And I'm not blaming Dan for that. Both of us have been really busy. October was nuts for both of us. I mean, absolutely. But that's how you get away from that, get away from having those conversations, get away from that relationship. And then you can start, as Dan said, have your bias fill in the gap.
How do you make time for that? I mean, I was going to say, you have families and marriages and jobs, and how do you do that?
Well, you find a time, and first of all, you stay after Dan. You bother him constantly, and you rib him if he doesn't do it, and send him gifts and all that sort of stuff. But then you find a time and you commit to it and you do it.
Yeah, we all need a friend that won't let us get away. And I called it inserting themselves. I had friends and have friends still that I was not, I mean, my husband's ill or he's gone, and I'm not a fun person to chase or sit with in certain seasons, because it was sad and not everybody wanted to engage in that. And I had friends who insisted, who I called it inserting themselves into my life. And I am so grateful for people that would not let me go, that would not let me not talk or be honest, that made me sit across the table after kids went to bed over gringo dip, because they wanted their eyes on me that week, that particular week, or that, so I think we all need people that won't let us go. And I would say that that's another part of friendships and some of the issues with friendships in culture is insecurity. Because obviously you're not insecure, Brennan, if you're chasing him. If you're and not because you just want to be friends with Dan so bad, but because of intentional, like we all need people to do that. But if you're insecure, if you feel like, well, they don't want to be friends with me, or they're not answering. I mean, there's a whole bunch of women who aren't friends because of those feelings. And that's hard. We have to put that aside for bigger good. That if you don't see each other, you start to get maybe weary even of the hard conversations, and because you forget that you care about each other. We're forgetful, kind of stupid humans. And so I think we have to spend time. And so, but you obviously have enough confidence to chase him down, for lack of a better word. I'm sure a guy doesn't like to hear it like that, but we need people to do that. So I think that's a big part of it. Insecurity can't play a role.
We also, I think, have made a practice of identifying the things that hinder, the things that turn into excuses to not do it. And have gotten to a point relationally where we can call each other on that. Again, him more than me, but the things that hinder kids' schedules, wanting to spend times with our spouses. I believe it or not, have a proclivity towards, being a bit of an introvert and a homebody and those sorts of things. And so getting to a place relationally where Brennan can call me on that, and me, him, and communicating to our spouses the importance of this, because they want to spend time with us despite what appearances, and making them know, like, hey guys, like, this is really important, and them seeing when we come back from those interactions that we're filled up, from spending time with our brothers, so identifying those things that hinder in a relationship, and then getting to a point, having put enough credits in the bank, so to speak, that people understand while you're getting together, you're starting to hang out at 8:30 at night when the kids are in bed, and and just his perseverance and consistency in pursuit
is loving you, really.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he is demonstrating love.
Then that's interesting you bring that up, because you were asking us, what does God have to say about it? And in the short preparation leading up to this, one of the verses that came to mind is in Colossians, when Paul says, and above all, put on love that binds everything together in perfect harmony. And that's the glue that keeps the body of Christ together, is that right there. And it's that common love in Christ. And it's funny, right before I turned my computer on for this thing, that same verse is what popped up on my YouVersion app. Verse of the day is Colossians 3:12. And it was like, okay, it's kind of like, there you go. There's your, how do we make this podcast short? That right there.
I did less preparation, but the verse that comes to mind, and I can't give you the line and verse of it, but don't give up meeting together as some are accustomed to doing.
Well, and both of those things, I love that Colossians passage because it's active. It doesn't just happen to you, but it's to put it on. And it lists the things that we're supposed to put on, but above all else, put on love. And I think about like getting dressed, I don't just get out of bed and the clothes fall on me. I have to actively, you have to put that on. You have to make a choice to put your feet in your shoes. And, that is, it's active. And I have to make a choice to put on love and not to put on proving a point or being right. I used to love to argue as well a long time ago. And I've lost some of that, but I think some of that is because of people, because you learn that I love people that I disagree with. And so I want to understand how they think. Our brains are wired differently. Obviously, you really believe that you think that. So how did you get there? And asking questions and help me understand. I start sentences a lot with that. Help me understand what you're saying or what you actually want me to hear, or, whatever that is. But I've heard stories of other men being on the back porch or in the room or whatever. And they're like, watching this like ping pong battle happening or whatever. And what do you think you have done in just the way of teaching other men? Are there other people involved in these conversations? Are there other people that you meet with and hold accountable this way? Or are you guys kind of, this is your one person that you really are this direct? And I don't know the answer. I'm just asking, as people are trying to imagine, do I have relationships like this? Can I have a relationship like this?
I think it's grown over time. Let me say it that way. I think in the aftermath of COVID, it originally, at least my recollection, it was just Dan and I, having conversations about that. But it depends on the setting. Like it is still occasionally, I think, Dan and I, but there are a couple other guys that come and listen and add their perspective to whatever we're talking about. And then, on the father son trip, it's cool because that's a large group. It's started as kind of a core group, and we've added people as we've gone along. I kind of had a total story about that earlier. So some of the people that are coming to that, some of the men, let me start with the men, are not people that I've had those conversations with at all. And so I think it's fruitful to have those conversations, to see that, like Dan said earlier, we can get at each other a little bit and then hug it out, right?
Yeah.
Right afterwards. And then, that's the men's side of it. And then you have boys, and obviously, we don't have all the, there's the 6-year-olds aren't out there when we're sitting around the fire pit, smoking a cigar or whatever. But
the 10-year-olds are listening though.
Yeah. Some of the teenagers.
My 10-year-old was there.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So, some of the
Sorry.
older boys, yeah.
No.
Some of the older boys are listening, and they're seeing that. They're seeing, like, it's okay. I don't have to just find people that agree with everything I say and just hang around those people. I can have these conversations because there's fruit in that. There's, the Bible says, and Dan quoted Proverbs earlier, so I'll quote it now. There's wisdom in the multitude of counsel. And the multitude of counsel doesn't just come from hearing the same thing from different people.
Yeah.
Like you want the different perspectives. You want to hear the different views. That's something that wasn't always taboo in politics. Like I'm going to plug a book. There's a great book about Abraham Lincoln called Team of Rivals. And what Lincoln did after he was elected was he put everybody that ran against him essentially in his cabinet. And yes, he had final say on everything, but he would at least listen and ask the question, like, why do you feel that way? And sometimes it changed his mind to the better of the country, to the better of everything.
What a confident, risky move. Like, that could go so badly. So that's an interesting perspective. I like it. And again, that's part of what, like we've already said, iron sharpening iron, or getting better. I think
it's refreshing too. We got into the discussion over the Church of Laodicea last week in Life Group, and the cold versus lukewarm. And I think people misinterpreted that scripture to see that cold means dead, inactive, whatever. No, cold in the regards of refreshing. And I think it is refreshing. You ask, when other people see this, I think at the end of the day, and maybe I'm wrong, and I'm not trying to toot our own horn here, but the vibe I got leaving that trip, or these instances where other people are in on it, is they come back. Like, one of the people that are routinely there, like, they're not trying to weasel their way out of our gatherings. Like, they want to come back. I think it's refreshing to see and to be a part of and to hear and here's the other thing we need to state in this podcast. Like, Brennan and I agree on more than we disagree. Like, at the end of the day, but I mean, the stuff you agree on is kind of boring to talk about, right? We want to talk about the things that get us fired up. So, but I think it's refreshing for people to sit in that, see us vehemently disagree, in my opinion, for good reasons. Like, I love hearing Brennan's reasons, and I think he enjoys, even comedically so, listening to mine. But like they enjoy seeing that. And then at the end of the day, like I said, like we hug it out, we laugh together, we wake up the next day and go fishing or float down a river or whatever, and it's like, yeah, I think it's refreshing because they don't see that. You
We
turn on
don't see it.
TV, you
Yeah.
pull up Twitter, you pull up whatever, and it's just nastiness and people, drawing these hard lines. And what they don't see is lines not being drawn. Like I'm not going to draw a line. Like I'm just not going to do it with Brennan. Like I said earlier, like he's my brother in Christ, and that's the main thing. And there are no lines in
Yeah.
that.
Well, it took time for you guys to figure out that you agreed on more than you disagreed on. I think, right? That takes conversation over time to dig and go through the uncomfortable or I mean, you had some choices at some point in the beginning or whatever to go, I don't want to do this anymore, or this isn't fun, or this is uncomfortable, or maybe people hear it and, maybe your wives are like, you guys, this is unhealthy, or, I don't know. And it takes time to get through the discomfort enough to go, actually, we've talked for hours and hours now, and we agree on enough things. Well, another question, do you feel like because you like to argue or like to talk about these things, that it kept you from, or that you have to make more effort to talk about real life? Do you feel like you've had to teach yourselves how to have a relationship about, like, for example, the things that he said that Sunday that you were like, I didn't know those things, and do you have to make an effort to be better that way?
I would say I think, and I don't want to miss.
Pretty organic.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's typically a lot of times where we start is what's going on. I typically when we're together, because it's not every week or anything. It's typically, when we do get together, it's for, 2 or 3 hours, I would say on average.
You have a lot of catch up to do.
Yeah, we have, and so we don't start with, oh, did you see the latest move, this politician made? And I mean, that it goes there, but that's not the starting ground. It's like, hey man, how you been? What's going on? Like that sort of conversation. And again, I think we both trust each other and the other guys in the group to lay that out. Like, this is what's going on. This has been great, but this has been hard.
No, that's good. And I kind of was hoping that's what you would say. Do you feel like that's uncommon in men too, to talk openly about, or because I think you're demonstrating something that's really, really necessary, but I wonder if it's really not organic or doesn't feel natural or instinctual.
And I can't quote the what book I got it from but there's been books about relationship between men and how most, men our age don't have many friends or anybody beyond their family and their wives or whatever is going on there that they can just sit and just communicate with and that sort of thing. Like, they don't know, like, if their car broke down in the middle of the night, they don't know who they'd call.
Mm-hmm.
Which is tragic, and part of the reason you get people that are isolated and just it's sitting in that isolation and the things that are not enough, like sitting in social media or sitting in those things that are less than,
less than, yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to dig that phrase out. I'm like, what is that phrase? Less than. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I mean, and honestly, it's probably because of social media and lots of things that have happened the last 5-ish years. But I mean, I don't know that women are any better maybe used to be accused of getting together and spilling their guts. And I don't know that we're any better about being vulnerable or honest with people, especially just like from the get-go, like what's really going on. And again, I have a few relationships that really insert themselves. And that came after hard things. That came when I was losing or lost my husband. So I'm so grateful because he was my person and I wouldn't have that, So,
that's an interesting,
better.
That's an interesting thing. When Brennan started and I started doing this, like I started seeing that my spouse doesn't necessarily have that. And it caused me, I mean, she's had a group, but I really don't want this to come off wrong. Like I think women have an even harder time in some regards.
Yeah.
Um, Prioritizing, that might not be the right word. Because I just think their role, especially once you have a family, I think their role is harder. It's more difficult.
Yeah. We have a lot of
And
expectations, whether we put them on ourselves or they're put on us.
right.
We're expected to keep a lot of balls in the air and
Yeah. And so what
things
it's
going.
caused me to do is be like, no, hey babe, why don't you guys just pick a day and go get coffee or go
Mm.
do this? And like it's caused me to almost do what Brennan does to me, do to her what Brennan does to me, which is like, no, go.
Mhm.
I got this. Well, I'm gonna create these couple hours for you because it's made me see the importance in her having something outside of just me, like you were saying a second ago. Like I need you to go foster that because it's at the end of the day, it's what's best for us. So it's been fruitful in my marriage that way. I would say that recognizing she also needs that,
Yeah.
and I need to help her do it.
I think sometimes too, this is going to sound weird. Like, I'm not saying that there's like women in your group, but I think there are people that you're friends with that are actually more like your spouse sometimes. And so, like, I think sometimes it's good to be around. I have friends who would think a little bit more like Scott. And so I'd be like, okay, I think I understand why he's thinking like this. Cause even though they're a chick, it's not always just guy girl, we're complete. I mean, you guys are both guys and you disagree on some things. And so sometimes that you find that person in your circle that's like, oh, that helps me understand them a little bit better. And again, it's just, I think the more kinds of thinkers and the kinds of communicators that we're around, it helps us realize we don't all do this the same. We all come from, I mean, 8 kids helps with that too, right? I have 8 different kinds of thinkers, kinds of studiers, kinds of communicators, kinds of they emote differently. I can yell at some, and if I raise my voice at some, they become a puddle, and that's been really good for me with humans across the board because they're not kids anymore; they're adults, and they're still my kids, and I can still see the meltdown of a hard conversation versus some where until you raise your voice they don't realize you're serious. And it's different kinds of people, I think, makes us better in all of these relationships. So
So,
yeah,
so
I can see how that could make Shannon better in your marriage.
another thing you said, and when you were talking about, kind of the people that you're close with, that you have these honest conversations with, you mentioned, going through hardship, and Dan, I don't know how much you want to share about this, so I'm not gonna. I don't want what anything you don't want to leave the nest. I don't want to leave the nest.
I tend to be an open book.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so what I'm going to say is, one thing after the COVID stuff that Dan went through is he lost his dad,
Right.
and I've been through that. I've been there. That happened to me at a relatively young age 20. So
Yeah.
I've been there, and so I do think that was another thing that helped kind of galvanize our relationship. Being able to walk through that with him.
Yeah.
And I'll let him say what he wants about that. I don't want to get too much into that, but anyway.
Actually, I think that had happened. Dad died right before COVID, thankfully, and I think that was one of the impetuses that led up to it. Was you saw that in me, and really what I was grieving with in that is I've got I don't know if unique's the right word, but I sometimes I feel dead inside because I am firm in my faith that when people leave this world as believers, like it's a it's a celebratory thing, and while I miss Dad's presence, I would not want it any other way. And Brennan has that same confidence. I saw that in him, and so that was appealing, because I look at how other members of my family reacted to that death, and it was like I can't relate to them, but I can relate to this guy because he's been there and done that, and he has that same confidence and that same faith. So
Yeah.
I don't know where we were going with that, but yeah, that was something at the get go that was like, oh, yeah, I don't know, that's a commonality, I guess, that drew us together.
Well, and hardship
Hardship.
and suffering of any kind either solidifies, I mean, people either show up or pull back. And I think that's one of the things that I learned, because I was probably colder, or you said dead inside. I hope I wasn't dead inside, but I didn't.
That's how they make you. That's how people make you feel. It's like, wait a
Yes.
second, am I not supposed to be celebrating this? The Bible says this.
Right. No, after we're not recording, I'll remind you some things you said to me. But anyway, it was fine. It was because
I'm not sorry.
No, you're not. But it the hard things either make people show up or make people pull back. And I don't know that I was a shower upper in the middle of difficult, if I didn't understand, I try to remember. I mean, I had some older friends that lost husbands, and so I mean, I did show up because one of them was one of my favorite people and had been my Sunday school teacher, and so I knew how to show up for her maybe. But as far as the way people inserted themselves in my life, I learned from them. I was watching them do things that I'm like, I will do that when I have to walk through this with someone else, or that is how I'm going to be, or I'm going to chase people down. And since Scott died, I have two younger friends now. So two widows that are, they're younger than my older friends that had gotten to be married for lots of years. And so that has been, really good for me to be like, no, sometimes it's still, even though I've been through it, you're like, do they want me to, am I going to intrude, or am I? And I'm like, Lauren, you know how this is, like, show up. You almost have to talk yourself through it. So I understand what you mean, that hard things, can change your friendship, good or bad. Sometimes people don't show up that you thought would. And so, and you're not angry, but you're just like, okay, well, clearly, things are different than I thought they were. And you have to keep moving. But so
I think that's an element we need to not miss. Like, shying away from the hard things is an absolute go-to defense mechanism in our society. Like, this is hard, therefore I'm not going to get to know this person deeper, because I know it's going to be a hard conversation that takes investment. And if that creeps into the church, you've got a real issue. Like, no, we're going to have the hard conversations, and I'm grateful to be in a church where our leadership doesn't shy away from the hard stuff. And I don't know if that's slothfulness or just fear of getting hurt, or what it is, but yeah, man, like, relationships are hard. They do take time.
It's probably all of those things, but I think of slothful a lot for some reason, because grief has made me slow to do things that I would not have been slow. I was confrontational before, and I still want to attack things head on, and I don't want to go to sleep mad. But there is a slothfulness in grief that isn't lazy. So I'm glad you used that word, because I don't think I'm a lazy person, but it feels lazy because you're scared to hurt. You don't want to make people sad anymore. I don't want to be in conversations where everybody cries anymore. Like, you're so then I'm slow to go attack the 474th time we have to have this hard conversation. And I've been wrestling with some of that in some of these reconciliation conversations that are going to start happening in our church, because I'm like, gosh, I'm slothful in some ways to want to do that. And so some of it is pain and fear. It's very anti or against my personality. So it's really weird for me. It's foreign for me, but grief has done a slothful. A lot of widows get tired at night for a very long time. And I got to where I was like, I can't have a really hard conversation after like 7 or 8 p.m. And that hasn't completely hung on, but a little bit. I am mentally tired, different. I was just telling someone yesterday, I'm like, gosh, I wish you knew me before when I was like great, because I'm not great anymore. My brain is fried. So anyway, there is a lot of that, where not even just hard conversations. We have kids who just won't try out for things because it's hard, or don't want to work out because it hurts my muscles. And I mean, one of my or date, or have a conversation with the opposite sex, or put ourselves out there at all.
Get a driver's license.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, we don't want to do hard things. And I listen to a lot of good parents, whether it's on podcasts or just friends of mine that are really good about having conversations with their kids about, hey, no, we do hard things. We hard things end up being great things. And I don't know that I did a great job for the first couple of years of Scott being gone, of teaching that. And now I find myself when my teenager is like, this is hard and I'm not going to do this. And I'm like, what do you mean this is hard? You've been through something actually hard, like actually difficult and sad. This is not it. Like this breakup, not it. You're fine. So I'm probably am cold-hearted and dead inside, but anyway, so yeah, grit, that's really grit in students and adults. And, we lack some grit.
So one thing I want to say to that, because and sorry, I'm not trying to have a pity party here, but after my dad passed away, 2 years later, my mom passed away.
Right.
And that was during my first semester of law school. And to your point, after that happened, and I got through that, there'd be these things like law school finals, and everybody's like panicking and like, oh my gosh, this is going to ruin my life. And I'm like, you know what? Like, even if I take this final and I fail it, it's not going to be the worst thing that's happened to me this year. And there's some freedom. There's some moxie and some freedom in that you're like, you know what? Well, what can this do to me that I haven't already been through worse?
Yeah. And maybe if we could get that way about the world and the enemy, and knowing that, that's some of what I think death does to a believer is I am keenly aware that this is not it, that this is not the only thing, that this is short and that I have a race to run, but that this is temporary. And I mean, I am keenly aware. And so it makes me live differently to go, you know what? I'm not going to let the enemy destroy this little blip on the radar that I have to get to maybe do something that matters, even if it's little. And I've always been that way. I was a weird high school kid laying in bed at night going, is this it? I want to do something that actually matters. Like I was weird like that. I wanted to live with purpose. So I still have a little bit of that, but it's different because you're like, I don't want that's our story, whether it's my adoption or it's Scott's life or the death or the ministry or our marriage, or I just don't want it lost on me in this sad widow story. I want it to be used for God's glory in a way that I think that's the best way to honor Scott's life, honestly, because that's what he pointed to. And I don't do it because he pointed to it, but it's like I get to do it also. I get to do it alongside what he got to do really well. I have this, my own race, and I always say he didn't pass the baton to me. I was running with my own baton and I just get to keep going a little bit longer. And he got promoted before I did. And I want to get promoted too, So it makes me live with a grit and a purpose, that is different. And so in a way, I'm grateful for the hard story as much as I have compassion for the way other people handle it. And maybe I'm a little less dead inside because of the different roles of the people who lost Scott. I see it differently. Right. And so you as the son, Dan, you handled something differently than maybe the spouse and maybe the daughter and maybe the sister, or I just made up those things. But I've had to, I've in eight kids felt differently. And my role was I'm the only wife. I'm the only one who lived that role. So balancing my grit and my I have a job to do with compassion, and that for my kids it never goes away. That they forever have milestones without their dad has probably made me better and softer, which I am continually having to learn how to be soft but strong. So
we are too.
Yeah. So
what's interesting is listening to you there, our stories is how the Great Commission plays out and how we react within our stories, like listening to your journey through that and how the low times and the dark times made you come back to this realization that no, my time here is finite. And with that finite time, the grit in that is I'm going to continue to do these things relationally and practice out grace and truth, because at the end of the day, like they'll know that we're his and that we love one another and that we refuse to not be relational with one another. And like I said earlier, that's appealing. It's becoming increasingly appealing in this post-Christian society that we live in. And so, and I'm not knocking, cold knock evangelism or whatever, but really the Great Commission plays out in this right here.
For sure.
I'm of a deep conviction of that. And now those relationships have to start somewhere. And so going out and establishing relationships and making Christ the center of how you interact within that is important. But I mean, relationships is how the Great Commission plays out.
For sure.
As Dan often says, that'll preach.
That'll preach. Yeah. Side sermon. No, that's exactly. I actually was just telling someone the other day why I don't want to quit doing Ordinary Grit. And because I have quit, I have not recorded. I've got kind of paralyzed for a season. And that's exactly the reason I said, I don't want to quit, because I did a class, sort of like a book study. It was the maiden voyage of the barn this summer, where people came and we read a book talking about sharing our faith, and we spent all this time in Matthew 28. And then a few weeks ago, we had 60 women out here talking about how to disciple, how to spend time with someone else. And it is this thing that isn't happening, but it is a command, right? It's the last thing he said to people before Jesus left the earth was to go and make disciples. And that sounds like a job and doesn't sound, like you just said, doesn't sound relational, but the reality is it is very relational. And the only way I really know how to do it is to tell my story and to talk about, I had a job interview this week, even, where I talked about Jesus, because I can't tell my story over the years. Why did I get out of recruiting? Well, I adopted 5 kids, and that's my life looked different in that season. And why did I do that? Why did I want 5 kids? And you can't not talk about what God's done in my story. And so I just do. And I am super grateful for that. And I don't want to quit doing that. I don't want to quit allowing people's stories to let them just talk about Jesus and the gospel. And that is how, the Bible says that the enemy is defeated by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. And Jesus did the first part. We can do the second part. And so it got me all excited. And then you guys were like the first thing. I'm like, okay, we're doing this. I don't want to do it on Zoom. I wanted to do it in a living room. Doesn't matter. It just needed to happen, because this is the kind of stuff that people need to hear, and they need to hear it over and over and over, because we don't do it the first time we hear it. We've got to hear over and over and over why it works, that these friendships are possible, that God wants this for us. So much of this is your purpose and identity comes out in this. You guys know what your identity is. And so you chase your relationships based on that, because you know that God had purpose, that your friendship is solid on Jesus, and the rest of the stuff doesn't matter. Like you want to talk about it. You're intelligent people that have to talk about some of this stuff, but at the core, the main thing is the main thing. Like I think Dan said that. So I think people have to hear that over and over and over, so that they can go do it, so that they can go make someone sit down with them and talk about real life. And it's uncomfortable. It's cringy. Lainey uses the word cringy all the time. It's cringy at first, but get past the cringy, and then the good stuff is on the other side of cringy.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. So you got up at, the crack of dawn to talk to me, and okay, we've talked for about an hour. That's good. Do you have anything else? Like one last thing that you're like, if somebody heard anything today, I wanted them to hear this.
Focus, to keep it succinct. It's not the discussion of the issues. That's the important part. It's the relationship. I think we've talked about that a lot today, but that's the start.
Yeah. It's
and then
very
you can get cringy after you have the relationship. You can get cringy.
Absolutely. Yep.
And I just, when we talked about it, it's worth repeating, like, don't not pursue something or someone that you feel your heart being pulled towards, because that's the spirit pushing you there. Like, don't not do it because it's going to be hard. Like, and there's courageousness in that. Like, be courageous, go do that, because at the end of the day, there's fruit. Um, it's going to build you up. That person's going to make you a better, more sanctified person. And why wouldn't you pursue that? Like, I don't know anybody that wouldn't want that, but the reality is, like, the best things in life worth having, like, they don't come easy, and it's not going to be easy. And so just, I'm kind of preaching to myself right now. Like, don't not do something because it's going to be hard.
Yeah. Life to the full isn't comfortable or lazy. It's full. And I think that we mix that up sometimes. So
for sure.
That's good. Hey, I really appreciate it. I'm serious. You guys got up really early and, could have said no. So I appreciate it. I think the timing is really important. And as soon as I find an editor, it'll come out.
Thank you so much for listening. If you have or know someone with an inspiring story, you can apply to be a guest at ordinarygrit.com. Be sure to connect with me on Instagram at Ordinary Grit Podcast to get to know me and my guests.